Hi everyone. Many times, of course, in the great hagiography of the Orthodox Church, we read about the martyrs. The martyrs are first in line, if you will, for those getting into the kingdom of heaven. And sometimes we also read about a saint like we're going to hear about now. His name was Damaskenos, and he's a new martyr who is commemorated on November 13th. Now, these martyrs are extraordinary in every way, as we all know. But perhaps most perplexing to us are those who set out to become martyrs. We might think that it's one thing to be caught unawares and be able to confess Christ, or to know that you're going to be persecuted and to be prepared for it at all times. But what about those who actively wanted to be martyrs? Well, in the case of St. Damaskenos, he was a boy who was born near Constantinople to extremely pious parents by all accounts. Unfortunately, however, he was left orphaned at a fairly early age. Because of this, and because of his lack of parental supervision, the early things in his life were not really good. His behavior was bad. So much so that one day he was arrested for what would have been considered a misdemeanor, but since it was 1681 and the Turks were in charge of Constantinople, he was going to have to pay the price one way or the other. So in this case, in order to avoid anything, he simply denied the faith of Christ. Now, this was something that perhaps we could say, well, he was young, he was inexperienced, he didn't really know what he was doing. But like so many other things in the spiritual life, this stuck with him. And as he grew older, he eventually returned to the faith and became a very, very pious monk on the holy mountain at the Great Lavra. Now, it was said that his asceticism and his spirituality surpassed many that were there. But at the same time, he was disturbed. He was still bothered by the fact that even though he had returned to the faith, that he had denied our Lord Jesus Christ. He was afraid that the Lord's words in Matthew would come back to him one day, when the Lord spoke about anyone who confesses him before men, the Lord will confess before his Father in heaven, but those that deny him before men, the Lord will deny. This haunted him, even though he had experienced undoubtedly many prayerful moments, many times where he felt close to God, yet there was something in his conscience that was still bothering him. So one day, the Patriarchate of Constantinople sent the Patriarch of Constantinople to the Great Lavra for one of his visits. And while he was there, St. Damaskenos contacted the man after the liturgy was over and spoke with him and wanted to put himself under his spiritual guidance. He confessed that what he really wanted to do was to confess Christ before men. And if this meant martyrdom, so be it. Well, the patriarch did what the brothers in the monasteries did not do. He encouraged St. Damaskenos in this endeavor. The brothers thought, well, you denied Christ once. What you don't want to do is get yourself in a situation where you're going to be having to confess Christ, and when things get tough, you end up denying him again, and so your last end could be worse than the first was. But the patriarch encouraged him more and more, saying, listen, I think this is a good thing that you're doing, and I will help you as much as I can, but in return, you have to promise to intercede for me in heaven, so that on my last day, I might also have someone to speak for me. Well, Damaskenos then embarked on a journey to Constantinople, where he was intent on confessing the Lord. But he did not want to involve any of the brotherhood of the Great Lavra. So what he did is he cut his hair, and of course monks never cut their hair, and he took on the outfit of a sailor at the time. and then began walking through Constantinople. As he passed by the great Hagia Sophia, he turned and he made the sign of the cross on his forehead. And there were some people there that saw him and thought, what's this guy doing? He's mad. And they thought him an idiot, and so they let him go. Later on, he encountered someone reading a book as he was strolling through the city. And he said, "Are there any words in that book that speak about Christ?" And the man who was reading the book said, "Well, what do you mean? Do you want to become a Muslim?" And he said, "Oh no, Jesus Christ is the true God, and I was wondering if your book had anything in there about it." Well, again, this man thought, this guy is out of his mind. What's he doing? Just leave him alone. And so he walked away. Now this happened 2 or 3 more times, and St. Damaskenos was beginning to get a bit frustrated. He felt like the Lord was perhaps saying to him, "Well, you're not worthy of this calling of martyrdom after all." But he was persistent. And even though he had gone several other places where the people there just thought him a fool and let him go, he finally went into one of the main places near the Sultan's home, and where there were many Muslims about, and began talking again about Jesus Christ and saying, "My dear people, you are so deceived. Get out off this road to hell and confess Jesus Christ, because he is the true God." And again, they first said, "You're out of your mind." And he says, "No, I'm not out of my mind. My heart is quite serene because I have my faith within me, which is burning brighter than the sun." He kept up with certain words like this, and including some disparaging remarks against the Prophet Muhammad. And finally the men there set upon him and beat him and brought him to the vizier, who was then asking him very calmly, "Is what I'm hearing about you true? Are you saying these terrible things?" And St. Damaskenos said, "Yes, it is true, and I am in my right mind, and I've said this and many more things than you've even heard." Well, the vizier at that point said, "Well, okay, I know you are one of the Raya." Now, the Raya in those days, that was a disparaging term for those non-Muslims that were living in Muslim rule. And it literally means cattle. That's what they thought of them. And he said, "Since you are of that group, you have to pay taxes, because that's the requirement. And so if you want, you may pay the tax and all will be forgiven and forgotten. But I see that this is not on your mind, because you act as if you were poor, and so you're probably desiring death instead." And St. Damaskenos said, "I am not poor. I have riches galore that you will never know about, and they are waiting for me in the kingdom of heaven. And if you will renounce your faith and follow Jesus Christ, then you can have this too." Well, that was about all the vizier was going to take. And so he ordered the execution of St. Damaskenos, and he was hauled off to the Fanar. Now, the Fanar is the site of the Patriarchate of Constantinople. And so right outside the gates, they took the sword and they cut off his venerable head. Such was the blow that blood spattered on the doors of a nearby shop. And the Patriarchate came out, several of these men, and they bought the doors and took the doors into the church to keep as sacred relics, because there was a martyr's blood on them. They also gathered up the head and the remains of St. Damaskenos, and eventually these remains found their way into a monastery church, where even today they are placed under the holy bema, underneath, in a place where they keep relics, deep underneath where the altar would be. So St. Damaskenos got his wish. And oftentimes for us, we deny Christ too, at least in our thoughts, in many ways, when our faith lags, when something happens and we're just not feeling like somehow we believe anymore. But we must come to our senses, because as we see, even in a case like this, with a man who had denied Christ as a young boy and really was not thinking much about it, wasn't too concerned about it, he was youthful after all, Youth will be careless. But even then, the grace of his baptism stuck with him, and he realized the high calling that the Lord had given him all along, and that was to the holy estate of martyrdom, one of many, many of the new martyrs during that age. So again, on November 13th, in 1681, St. Damaskenos entered into his heavenly reward. May it always be the same for us. Bye-bye.